Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So have you guys ever been watching a horror movie and you see this little disclaimer at the front and it says based on a true story? Because I have seen so many horror movies that make this claim, and every time I watch one of these I just think, are they being a little dramatic or is this actually factual? So today we're gonna go over a couple of horror movies that are based on true stories, and we're gonna see, are they actually true or are they kind of bullshitting us? Because I think most of them are kind of a little phony. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first movie I chose was The Exorcism of Emily Rose. This is a movie I really enjoy. I think it's pretty good, but it's about a young girl who ends up getting possessed while she's in college. And then she starts to have like really crazy freakouts. So she goes and sees a psychologist on campus, and he believes that she has psychosis induced from seizures, but her parents believe it's a religious thing and a demon's possessing her. So she gets a priest to do a bunch of exorcisms on her, and he does an extreme amount and she ends up dying, and then he gets arrested. So that's the gist of this movie. It is based on a true story, so this claim is pretty factual. So now we're just gonna go over just how similar the true case is to the movie story. So this is based on the true case of Annalise Michael, and she was diagnosed with seizures and psychosis at the age of 16. She started hallucinating things in her mind and hearing voices specifically pertaining to religion that were telling her things like religion is bad, and she was really terrified of religious memorabilia or just religious artifacts, so like crosses and anything church related, which is why her parents believed that she was possessed by a demon. But initially she did try a couple psychiatric meds. She tried about 5 different psychiatric meds until her parents believed that none of them were gonna work. So they ended up taking her to a priest, and the priest performed 67 exorcisms on this poor girl. So obviously 67 exorcisms is extremely intense. I don't even know how you perform that many, but she did have that done. And during that time period, she wasn't eating, she wasn't drinking, she wasn't getting any of her nutrients, and she was also freaking out psychologically. So she ended up dying from malnutrition, and both the parents and the priest received jail time for murdering her. So it is very similar to the movie. The only difference is, I would say, is the movie kind of makes you more sympathetic to the parents and the priest, and it takes a couple different standpoints regarding the trial. It's not very accurate when it comes to the actual trial aspect, but it is pretty accurate in the similarities between the girl who gets possessed in the movie and Annalise in real life. So I would say this is based on a true story. I think that this is a pretty accurate depiction of what went on. Obviously some stuff is dramatized, but that's just to make it scary, because if it wasn't so dramatic, then it wouldn't be scary. Next up, we have a movie that I absolutely love and I'm terrified of. So I've always been curious about this one, and this movie is The Strangers. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it, but it's about a young couple who goes to a remote cabin, and they end up just spending the night there after they go to a wedding. They're kind of having some tension going on. There's a proposal, lots of different things happen, but the main gist of that movie is that 3 strangers start to terrorize them all night just because they were home. Which, that is absolutely a horrifying concept to me. If anyone's terrorizing me just because I'm at home, then screw them. I love home. But this movie does have a disclaimer at the start that it's based on true stories. I was always curious if this one actually was a true story, because this would be horrifying if it was. But it turns out it's just a very dramatic disclaimer. It's not actually based on one specific case. It is based on a couple robberies that the director had occur in his neighborhood. It is also loosely based on the Manson murders. It's not super closely related to it, so you could claim that this movie was based on a true story technically, but I don't think that I would actually consider it based on a true story, because it's not based on one solid case, and it's not an exact reenactment of the Manson murders or anything. So I would say it's just loosely based on true story, but I wouldn't take this one as face value and be like, oh, The Strangers is based on true stories. So that's my opinion on it. I think that they were just trying to be dramatic and have you be really scared before the movies. I just know that this disclaimer scared the crap out of me when I was like 10 watching this, because I thought that this was a real possibility. I mean, sure, it's a real possibility, but I don't think it would go down in the way that it does in the movie. I think that's a little dramatic, or at least I'm hoping it's a little dramatic. Next up, we have a case that I'm actually very familiar with because I have read the book and I've seen both of the movies and I've read quite a bit about it, but this is the Amityville house. So this has to do with Ed and Lorraine Warren, which this will be a running theme throughout this video. I'm just gonna state it now, unpopular opinion, but I think that Ed and Lorraine Warren are just such phonies. I think that the Conjuring universe really did them a solid by making them seem super cool, because Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson literally are amazing in those movies. They are the best part about them. And they make Ed and Lorraine Warren look super cool and like the most beautiful, wonderful couple alive. But Ed and Lorraine Warren are kind of scam artists, so I hate to burst your bubble if you don't really know their backstory. I could do a whole other video on that if you guys want, but the Amityville house is based on a true story. There is 2 movies. There's a remake and there's an original. So in the original movie, this couple moves into a house. It has a very cheap price because murders occurred there previously. And so they get a really good deal on this house. They move in and then they start to notice that something is a little weird about the house, and they call in a priest to try to bless the house, but the priest is pretty much saying, oh my God, there's a demon in here, and a demon told him to get out. So that's the big premise of the movie. The couple starts to become very aggravated and violent with their children. The husband especially starts to get really, really aggressive with everyone, which wasn't really how he was. So they believe that the house did it, and the previous murders had made a very demonic presence in the house. So that's the movie version. Real life version isn't too far off. So I read the book, so I kind of know what their accounts were exactly, but George and Kathy moved into a house just like the movie, and they got a really, really cheap deal on it. And then they started to claim that a lot of weird stuff was happening. George believed that he was becoming more aggressive. Him and Kathy were abusing their children, which I don't know if I believe that a demon made them abuse their children. I think that that was a big excuse. So weird. But they also claimed that there was black slime oozing from the walls, that there was flies everywhere, there was horrible smells, like pretty much everything that could go wrong would go wrong. They claimed that there was a weird red door in the basement and that the house was built on an Indian burial ground. Pretty much all your typical scary movie nonsense. So that's the real life story of it. It's very, very similar to the movie. So the movie is based on a true story, but is the true story actually true? That's what makes this based on a true story thing complicated, because I don't think that the Amityville house was actually haunted. I actually think that was a big scheme. I think that Ed and Lorraine Warren were in on it because Kathy and George were actually caught in a lot of lies. There was a native tribe who said that the house was not built on an ancient Indian burial ground. There were also multiple people who were able to back up the fact that these were different lies. They claimed that the house price was lower than it actually was. They had claimed that the ghost had followed them to their new house and there was like green slime coming down the stairs, which is super outlandish. It was also shown that the priest had never actually visited the house, and that was a made-up story. So George and Kathy lied quite a bit. And I also saw that a lot of the future owners and the people who renovated the house said that there was literally no paranormal activity. So I think that this movie is based on a true story, but I don't think that the true story it's based on is actually factual. So very complex, but very interesting story. I'm very intrigued by Amityville because I just love like reading about hoaxes and stuff. Next up, we have a movie that is very, very popular. We have Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and this movie, if you haven't heard about it and you've been living under a rock, it is about a group of teenagers who are going on a road trip through Texas. They pick up this crazy hitchhiker who has an insane family filled with cannibals. including a killer named Leatherface who wears flesh on his skin. So at the start of this movie, it also has a disclaimer saying based on true story. This is another one similar to The Strangers where it's based on a real life case, kinda, but it's not super accurate to what actually occurred in that case. So Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based on the serial killer Ed Gein, and he's very infamous for making lamps and different furniture out of human flesh. So that's very disturbing and disgusting, but similar to Leatherface, that's what Leatherface also does in the movie. So I think that's where most of the similarities lie. I don't think that the similarities are super similar to the point where I would say that like it's entirely based on Ed Gein's murders. Because Ed Gein was mostly a corpse robber. He didn't really kill very many people. He killed more than what he should have. Nobody should kill any amount of people. But he killed 2 women, and then the rest of his crimes were grave robberies to make his bizarre furniture. Like, go to IKEA. I know IKEA didn't exist back then, but I wish he would have had the option. But yeah, I would say that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is kind of based on true story, but not really. It's not super accurate to what Ed Gein did during his crimes. So I would say it's loosely based on a true story. Finally, we have a very underrated movie. I love this movie. I know that a lot of people find it cheesy, but it's The Haunting in Connecticut. I love Kyle Gallner in this movie. He's so good in everything. But this film is about a family with a son who has leukemia and they need to be closer to his hospital, so they end up moving into a house, and they got, once again, similar to Amityville, they got a really good deal on the house, and so they move in. Everything's okay until they discover that it was formerly a funeral home / mortuary, autopsy, everything. They did everything there, and they actually found proof of this with different pictures of the formerly dead bodies and the autopsies. They found a lot of disturbing tools in there, and they didn't really think too much of it. I mean, of course they found it disturbing, but they didn't think that it would turn into a big fiasco. And so in the movie, Matt becomes more and more aggressive. He starts to get violent imagery of a boy who has like things sketched into his flesh, and he starts to think about like all these spirits and picture them in his mind, and he starts to become really like aggressive and kind of out of character for him, and he starts to get more and more sick, and a lot of stuff happens in the movie, but that's the main gist of it. So this is also based on a true case, and this is pretty close to what actually occurred in real life. But this is another one with Ed and Lorraine Warren, and another one that I think is kind of a little bit fishy. So this is based on the real life Snedeker family. That is such a hard thing to pronounce. But they moved in with their son Philip. Similar to the movie, Philip had leukemia, so they wanted to live closer to his hospital. They got a good price on a house, and in real life, this house was also formerly a funeral home, mortuary situation. So they claimed that Philip had started to become delusional. He started to become psychotic. He was hallucinating a lot of scary imagery, and he started to act very violently. He would strap his brother down to tables, and he actually assaulted his cousin. And I believe it said his cousin was in the hospital for like 47 days straight after this attack. So that's pretty crazy. But it's very, very similar to the movie. I would say that the only difference is that the movie, there were more focus on seances and the history of the mortuary. In real life, it was more so focused on Philip and his psychotic tendencies that were occurring and his shift in personality. But there was a couple of very interesting things that weren't really mentioned in the movie compared to the real life story. I know that the mom claimed that she had been sexually assaulted by the demon in the house. And this claim that I'm about to say I think is maybe a little bit phony, but she claimed she was mopping and there was a pool of blood on the floor. Like the water turned into blood. That is BS. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna debunk that now. That did not happen. And I'm a ghost believer. I've seen ghosts, but I don't think that happened, to be honest with you. So Philip ended up getting diagnosed with schizophrenia, and they moved out of the house, and seemingly everything was fine. So the family got Ed and Lorraine Warren to do a cleansing alongside a priest of the house, and then they moved out of the house anyways, which I don't really know why you would bother cleansing the place, I guess for the new owners. But Ed and Lorraine are kind of phony anyway, so I don't believe they cleansed anything. But they ended up moving to a new house, and then suddenly Philip was totally fine. I'm not really sure what happened with his cancer, but I know that his mental illness supposedly got better, but I don't know. This is a very tricky case. I'm not really sure how much of it is factual, but it is true that the movie is based on a true story. Technically. Similar to Amityville Horror, this could be up to interpretation whether or not you believe that this actually happened. But yes, the movie and the true story are very, very similar as far as most of the details go. So yeah, that is my list of movies that are based on true stories and whether or not they're lying to you. I've always wanted to make a video on this because I honestly think that there's just so many movies that make this claim, and not a lot of people Google it afterwards, so I thought this might be helpful. Let me know what you guys think of these cases. Do you believe the true stories are actually factual, or do you think that Ed and Lorraine are phonies? Let me know, but don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next video. Bye guys.